Hello, my name is Lisa Haywood. I am at the DOE and I'm the prevention coordinator here. And I'm really honored today to be joined again by the two MTSSB experts from the office, Catherine Leswing and Molly White. Today is our fourth part in our series of how to develop a tier 1 system and practices. And today we're going to focus on school-wide acknowledgement systems. You can see we still have a number of events coming up, so stay tuned to learn about data collection, SEL, curriculum strategy, universal screening, and single requests for assistance in school. So with no further ado, let's dive right into school-wide acknowledgement systems. From a preventative perspective, why should a school have an acknowledgement system? And there are a number of reasons why you should. And in no ranking order, an acknowledgement system helps create positive students to staff interactions throughout the school. They clarify expectations for appropriate behavior and feedback. They provide consistent messaging across school settings, and they increase the likelihood that desired behaviors will be repeated. Additionally, they reduce the need for time-consuming disciplinary measures that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and they serve as a reminder for staff to provide positive, specific feedback to students. And before I hand off to Catherine, just for clarification here, a school-wide system is a little bit different from one individual giving acknowledgement to individual students. As individuals, we might do that very well. As educators, we might acknowledge all kinds of positive behaviors and work in our students. But when we do that collectively as a school, we set standards that really make a difference in student behavior across the board. So Catherine, our first expert, is going to walk you through some more important elements of this.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was a great introduction. And we just wanted to show this sort of step-by-step process that we've been covering in this series to really ground this presentation in and why we're talking about acknowledgement systems today. And really the foundation for all of this work is the school-wide expectations. So you would want to make sure before you're developing an acknowledgement system that you have gone through some of these previous steps that we covered in this series and will continue to cover if we have not done so yet. And the reason for this is that it's hard to acknowledge students for expected behavior if they're not sure what that expected behavior is. We all individually know sort of generally what's socially acceptable, but it's really important that we name that for students and teach it explicitly, and then our acknowledgement systems become that much more powerful and effective. So you can see in these steps for implementing school-wide expectations, we have covered and will continue to cover some of the key parts of this in our series on Tier 1 systems, including the school-wide behavior response plan and data collection to track student outcomes. As we've mentioned in previous videos, it's very important to have some sort of universal understandings and considerations before we jump into this work that will impact an entire student body. So we here at the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness really promote the idea of youth and family voice and staff buy-in. So it's important to involve staff, students, and families in the development of any school system to garner that buy-in and maintain that sustainability. And that's true too for the acknowledgement system. Making sure that the systems that are in place are contextually and culturally appropriate for your student body. This includes level, age level, language, grade level, and then continuing to monitor and looking at disaggregated data to make sure that that what you've been implementing is working for all subgroups of your student population. So we're going to get a little into the what of the acknowledgement system right now. And I at the very base, an acknowledgement system is founded on offering students specific praise. And this is something that has come out of years of research, particularly with regard to positive behavior intervention and supports. And a piece of literature from the team at PBIS noted that this acknowledgement should really be a positive statement that's contingent upon a staff or an adult seeing the desired behavior occurring. So it's a contingent upon seeing that behavior, and it specifically names that for the student. So it's not simply good job, but it's thank you, student, for following the directions on how to write this specific thesis statement or whatever the lesson may be. That's a very academic example, but really tying the praise to the desired behavior that was witnessed. So we're going to cover a few key features of an acknowledgement system here. And as you develop your own at the school level, these are things to keep in mind. As I mentioned before, it's really critical that they're tied to school-wide expectations. That just creates a streamlined system for students and really makes the acknowledgement system that much more impactful and likely to achieve the desired results. They're developmentally relevant both for age level and where students are at with their skill set. So if you're in the school year and you're just barely starting to teach those school-wide expectations, more reinforcement, more acknowledgement at that point in the school year is likely important. It's important to have varied approaches to acknowledgement. So it's not a simple, one type of acknowledgement for the entire student body, but students can come to expect different types of acknowledgement and recognition for meeting expectations. So the different types of approaches can include tangible recognition, so actually material recognition of a job well done. It can be social, it can be privileges awarded, but those can all be varied in a discussion for your staff. They're valuable to diverse groups of students. So depending on age level, interest, culture, the acknowledgement being offered is something that students find valuable. Similarly, acknowledgements are offered both at the individual level and the group level. They often allow for choice. They're efficiently delivered. We are always a proponent of this. It should not interrupt instruction time to offer the acknowledgements. It should be seamlessly woven into the school day and is a low lift for educators. They're predictable and frequent, so students have an idea of what's expected, and they also know that they're going to achieve that same outcome on a regular basis, so that encourages continued behavior. And they're available to all students. So experts suggest that within a semester period, about 50%, or I should say a quarterly period, about 50% of the student body has had access to the acknowledgement system, and that all students, regardless of academic performance, behavior performance, have the opportunity to be acknowledged. And then continuing to monitor this system for impact. So you're not just training up your staff and working to develop an acknowledgement system only to have the end result be unknown, but you're actually seeing, is this working for our students? Is this working for staff? And continuing to do that quality improvement. So we wanted to jump into some examples to walk you through, and your team, if it's a leadership team or a tier 1 team, how you might begin to think about acknowledgement systems. This is one example of a system that a school has out there. It's very easy to research different types of systems, and this is somewhat of like a ticket system, or some folks call them a token economy. In this school, you can see the school-wide expectations spell power. purpose, ownership, work ethic, empathy, and respect. And students can be recognized in a variety of settings for meeting these expectations or demonstrating these values. On the right-hand side, you see how a teacher or staff would recognize a student and what the process would be for earning one of these tickets and then having a drawing on a regular basis. This was all created at the local level. So there's a weekly drawing, there's a monthly drawing, which has a little bit larger prize associated or recognition associated with it. And similarly, the semester drawing is also has sort of a bigger reward tied to it. But this is one way to recognize students. It keeps it fun, it keeps it light. Teachers can enter notable deeds when they have the time. And that is one example of a system. When you're meeting with your team, you can sit down and think about what types of acknowledgement do we already do? Do we have a student of the month program? Do we have a teacher of the year program? This can be for both staff and students, a way to acknowledge everyone in the building. Do we have, trying to think of other types of examples, certain privileges, ice cream socials that we offer for students? And then by whom is this recognition offered, and to whom? Who is the target population? So oftentimes some of these things are not offered to the entire student body. It might be the 5th grade team, it might be one classroom, and inventorying really all the different types of acknowledgement systems you have going on. And then looking to see if there's gaps and if you would like to add or bolster your acknowledgement system to meet some of those core features that we discussed a little bit earlier. This table also offers you a place to add the coordinator's name, who's going to be overseeing the system, how much would it cost, how frequently would the acknowledgement be occurring, what's the desired behavior. Those should really be tied to the school-wide expectations. And then how will you track if who's accessing this acknowledgement? So are you hitting that 50% mark, or does it contribute to that 50% mark per quarter? And what outcomes are you achieving? And on the next page, you'll see this is quite a bit of text. And so please feel free to pause this recording and look at it in detail. But this is a lot of examples. We always are proponents of keeping it simple. And so you may want to not do this whole array, but really think, what are a handful of core acknowledgements that we really value as a school? They don't necessarily need to be tied to a ticket system. There's different feelings around that. But you can look at some of these different examples and see if they might be a fit for your school, and maybe you're already doing some of them. And I won't go through all of the different steps here, but you can really see how each column is filled out to speak to that left-hand column and what you're looking for in the system. I will say, just draw attention to evidence of access and outcomes down at the bottom. So lots of times the way to see who's accessing that system is you keep a log of recognized students, and you can cross-reference it either at the grade level or classroom level to make sure that all students are having access to acknowledgements. And then you can track outcomes through behavior data. Schools often use Swiss to track behavior to see if there's any change over time with the implementation of your acknowledgement system. And with that, I have spoken far too long. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Molly.
Thank you so much, Catherine. So Catherine kind of walked us through some of the important features, but I'm going to go through some of the considerations when you're trying to set up an acknowledgement system for success. So obviously, whenever we implement something new within a school or district, we want it to be successful. One of the key things you can do is keep it simple. Just like in the behavior matrix Catherine just shared with us, have everything easily defined and keep it in a matrix or something like that so people can reference back and kind of keep it clear in their minds. What are the expectations and how are we operating with this acknowledgement system? And students can reference it as well. reinforcement consistent with skill level is also important. When we're talking about skill level, we're talking about the new skills that you're likely teaching with this acknowledgement system. So like Catherine pointed out earlier, this is all tied into your school expectations. So you're teaching these expectations as new skills, and you want to reinforce where students are. Just like if you were trying to teach students long division, you would reinforce it and reteach when the skill is new, and then kind of gradually release them into independence with it. Another consideration is to be considerate of the student's culture and learning history, and kind of how the student fits into the climate and culture of your school. Ensure that all students have access. I know Catherine said it a few times, but it is important that your acknowledgement systems are accessible by every student in your student body, so everyone can feel successful and incorporated into your school's climate and culture. And when we're talking about keeping it simple, we do still want it to be specific. Less room for kind of the gray interpretations, but be specific with your expectations and with the acknowledgement. When you're acknowledging students, you don't just want to say good job, but really reinforce those positive expectations that they met. Having greater attention to the desired skill rather than the problem behavior. In the parentheses, you'll see 5 to 1 positive. Here, what they're really trying to encourage is 5 positive attentions to 1 redirection for a negative or problem behavior. So try to think of that 5 to 1 ratio when you're interacting with a student. That'll keep kids feeling successful and engaged with the system. And then don't use withholding or removal of the positive acknowledgement or the positive feedback as a threat or bribe. It should always be seen in the positive. You don't want students to be thinking, oh goodness, if I don't listen to teacher, I'm going to, lose my chance at pizza party or whatever it is. It should never be held against them. And now that you've gone through all those considerations for how you're going to successfully implement it, we're going to think a little deeper about actually implementing this acknowledgement system. So of course, you want your staff trained up with some professional development. You want them to know when it's getting implemented, who's doing it, what's their role, how is this going to impact their day-to-day. You want them to know when and how are the parents and families being included. And that can extend to the whole community, having them knowledgeable about the acknowledgement system and sending home possibly, flyers or notes of success, and really highlighting those students that are doing well within the positive expectations and the acknowledgement system. And also, in that same spirit, why are we doing this, and why is the acknowledgement system important? It's helpful for the professional staff to know that, for the families to know that, and for the students. So when you're teaching the students about the acknowledgement system, also make sure they're understanding why this is important. And when you're teaching it, that you should be really explicit again with how they're going to earn the reward or the acknowledgement, how they're going to receive it. Some students may think that this is a weekly acknowledgement, but really they kind of have to wait until the end of the semester. That's important for a student to know. And then how to respond or how to redeem if it's kind of like a token economy that Catherine had mentioned, how are they going to redeem their points or their coins or whatever it is. And then gather feedback from your students, from your families, and from your staff about the implementation. That's valuable in thinking about future iterations of your acknowledgement system. And then the last thing we're going to touch upon is monitoring outcomes for quality improvement. So when we implement a system, we don't just want to bring it live, have everybody taught up, and then kind of let it fall to the wayside. We want to continue monitoring to make sure that what we're doing is actually having a positive impact. So one way to do this is to gather student and staff feedback, kind of like I alluded to earlier. Maybe they have ideas about updating the acknowledgement system or ways to change it and make it better. Use the Schoolwide data to identify frequent behavioral errors. and then maybe change your expectations that go along with the acknowledgement system. And then, of course, it was already touched upon earlier, but make sure you're monitoring who is accessing your acknowledgement system. If it seems to be, one grade in particular is often accessing the acknowledgement system, but maybe first and fifth grade are very rarely getting acknowledgements, maybe reconsider how it's set up or how students are able to receive these things to make sure that all students are able to access it. And with that, we want to encourage you to reach out if you have any questions, or if you, are there any resources that you want us to share? I support the Southwest New Hampshire with MTSSB implementation. Catherine is in South Central, but if you find yourself outside of these regions, please still reach out to one of us, and we're happy to connect with you and your school. And looking ahead, our next video that we will release is about data collection to track student outcomes. And we encourage you to reach out, to look back on our YouTube page. These are all in one playlist to check out our first videos 1 through 3 if you haven't seen those already. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and we hope